Tonight, let the room around you become quiet, and imagine that the present is slowly loosening its hold, like a curtain being drawn back from an open window above a warm, dark sea. You do not need to hurry. You do not need to remember every date, every name, or every palace corridor. This is history, but it is also a place to rest. Let the past come toward you gently, not as a storm of battles and politics, but as lamplight on stone, salt air moving through a harbor, the soft turning of papyrus pages, and a young queen listening carefully in a city where many languages drifted through the streets. Tonight, we are going to Alexandria more than 2,000 years ago, to the last century before Egypt became part of Rome. We are going to follow the life of Cleopatra, not only as a legend, not only as a beautiful face painted by later imaginations, but as a woman born into danger, educated among books, surrounded by ambition, and forced to make decisions in a world ruled largely by men with armies. Her story is often told as a story of romance and drama, but beneath that brighter surface there is another story, quieter and more human. A child in a palace, learning words, a princess watching adults measure power in whispers, a young woman understanding that knowledge can become protection, a queen trying to hold a country together while Rome grows larger beyond the sea, a mother, a ruler, a strategist, a person who must keep her face calm while history presses at the door. So settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. The Mediterranean is dark outside the city walls. The moon is pale over the harbor. Ships rest at anchor, their ropes creaking softly. Somewhere, a lamp burns late in a library. Somewhere, a scribe lifts his reed pen, pauses, and writes a name that will travel far beyond his own life. Cleopatra, before she became a queen, before Caesar entered Egypt, before Antony sailed east, before poets and historians turned her into symbol and rumor. She was a child in Alexandria. The city itself was almost a character in her life. Alexandria stood by the sea, bright with marble, wind, trade, and voices. It had been founded by Alexander the Great, and long after Alexander himself was gone, his name still lay across the city like sunlight. Ships came from the Greek world, from Egypt's river towns, from the coast of Syria, from Cyprus, from Rome, from places beyond the horizon. Merchants brought grain, glass, perfume, papyrus, linen, spices, stories, and news. Sailors shouted in different tongues. Priests moved through temple courts. Scholars argued under shaded walkways. Children ran between columns. And above it all, the pharaoh's lighthouse stood near the harbor. One of the wonders of the world, guiding ships through night and mist. Imagine the city in the early morning. The air is blue-gray before sunrise. The sea smells of salt and wet rope. Fishermen prepare their boats. Market sellers lift cloth covers from baskets. Donkeys complain in alleys. The first light touches the tops of buildings before sliding down columns, doorways, and painted walls. In the royal quarter, where palaces, gardens, courtyards, libraries, and ceremonial halls cluster near the water, the day begins more quietly. Servants move with trays. Guards change positions. Curtains are drawn back. Lamps are trimmed. The palace wakes before the princess does, because palaces always do. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek Macedonian royal family that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Her ancestors were not native Egyptian pharaohs in the oldest sense. They came from the world that followed Alexander's conquests, and they held Egypt through a mixture of Greek kingship, Egyptian tradition, wealth, ceremony, and political skill. This meant Cleopatra inherited more than a crown. She inherited layers. Greek language and Egyptian temples, Macedonian family customs and Nile festivals, palace education and public ritual. A court that looked toward the Mediterranean and a country whose life depended on the river. She grew up between worlds, and perhaps that is one reason she learned to listen carefully. Her father, Ptolemy XII, ruled before her. He was a king who needed Roman friendship to survive. Rome, far away in Italy, was becoming the great force of the Mediterranean. Its armies had crossed lands, defeated rivals, taken cities, and influenced kingdoms. Egypt still had wealth, especially grain, but wealth without strength can attract danger. Cleopatra's father understood this. He gave gifts, negotiated, borrowed, flattered, and tried to keep Rome satisfied. The court knew this too. Children in palaces hear more than adults think. A princess may pass a doorway and catch a phrase: tribute, debt, Rome, senators, ships, loyalty, danger. She may see her father smiling at visitors and understand, even before she has the words, that the smile is not simple happiness. It is policy. It is survival. Cleopatra's childhood was not the innocent freedom of running through fields. It was a childhood inside a palace where family and politics were braided tightly together. In Ptolemaic royal houses, brothers and sisters might become co-rulers. They might marry one another to preserve dynastic tradition. They might also become rivals. The palace was a home, but also a chessboard. Every birth mattered. Every alliance mattered. Every advisor had an interest. Every rumor had somewhere to go. And yet, for all this danger, there was learning. This is where Cleopatra begins to become herself. She was taught Greek, the language of her dynasty and court. But she did not stop there. Ancient writers later remembered her as a ruler who could speak many languages. And in the story that has come down to us, she was unusual among her family because she learned Egyptian. This mattered deeply. Many earlier Ptolemies ruled over Egypt while remaining distant from the language of many of their subjects. Cleopatra understood that language is not only a tool for speaking, it is a bridge. It is a gesture of respect. It is a way of entering another person's world without asking them to leave it first. Imagine her as a girl in a shaded room, leaning over a tablet or papyrus, repeating words after a tutor. Greek first, crisp and familiar, Egyptian sounds, older and tied to the land beyond the palace. Perhaps some Latin, because Rome must be understood. Perhaps languages of neighboring peoples, because Egypt sat at a crossroads and a queen who could speak without an interpreter could hear more truth than one who waited for translation. The lesson room smells of ink, wax, polished wood, and warm stone. A tutor recites, a servant moves quietly in the corridor. Outside, fountains sound in a courtyard. The young Cleopatra listens, repeats, questions, and remembers. She studies more than language. There's philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, music, history, rhetoric, perhaps geography, perhaps the stories of kings and queens before her. Alexandria was famous for its intellectual life, especially its library and scholarly traditions. Whether we imagine her reading in the great library itself or learning from teachers shaped by that world, the atmosphere around her is one of books, debate, and inquiry. A shelf of scrolls is a different kind of army. A mind trained among books can travel without leaving the room. It can compare rulers, study mistakes, remember treaties, understand symbols, speak to priests, charm diplomats, challenge advisors. and recognize danger hidden behind polite words. Cleopatra learned early that beauty might be noticed, but intelligence could be used. At night, the palace changes, the public rooms grow quiet, the lamps burn lower, the sea wind enters through openings and stirs thin fabrics. Somewhere outside, the harbor continues its slow breathing. Ropes, waves, wood, distant voices. Perhaps a young princess lies awake, listening, thinking about the languages of the day, the stories of old rulers, the power of Rome, the uneasy faces of men who came to speak with her father. This is a good place to pause and let the first image settle. A child in Alexandria, a city by the sea, a palace full of learning and danger. A dynasty old enough to feel permanent, though nothing in history is permanent. A girl who is already being prepared for a world in which words may be as important as swords. Let us stay with that childhood a little longer, because this is where the sleep of the story becomes soft. The royal quarter of Alexandria was not only halls of power, it was also gardens, shaded walks, fountains, birds moving through fig and palm. Cool stone under bare or sandaled feet, servants carrying folded linen, and tutors waiting with scrolls. In the hottest part of the day, when the sun whitened the courtyards and the sea light was too bright to look at directly, the palace would draw inward. Curtains stirred, voices lowered, lessons moved into rooms where walls held the heat back for a little while. A young princess might learn from many people in one day. A Greek tutor explains poetry, another speaks of kings before Alexander. A priest from an Egyptian temple teaches older titles and sacred customs. A court official explains tribute, grain, and the importance of the Nile flood. A musician demonstrates rhythm. A philosopher asks a question that does not have one answer. A scribe shows how a line of ink can preserve a law, a prayer, or a debt longer than memory can. Outside, the city is never still. Alexandria has layers of sound. Gulls above the harbor, wheels over stone, sandals and colonnades, distant hammering from ship repairs, traders calling prices, temple bells, water in basins, the murmur of scholars arguing over a word. The young Cleopatra grows up inside this sound, and perhaps it teaches her something useful. A ruler must hear many voices at once without losing her own. The library, whether imagined as a vast institution, a royal collection, or the wider scholarly world of the city, becomes part of her inner landscape. Scrolls rest in ordered rows. Some smell of papyrus, dust, oil, and cedar. Some carry poetry. Some carry astronomy. Some carry mathematics. Some carry mathematics. Some carry the histories of kingdoms that rose, boasted, and vanished. To a child born inside a dynasty, such histories are not merely interesting. They are warnings placed on shelves. A tutor may open a scroll and speak of earlier queens. Hatshepsut, perhaps, who had ruled Egypt long before, presenting herself with pharaonic authority in a world not built to expect it. Arsinoe, Berenice, women of Cleopatra's own dynasty, remembered for ambition, survival, alliances, and conflict. The lesson is not always spoken plainly, but Cleopatra may understand it anyway. A royal woman can be praised after death and resisted in life. She can be necessary and feared at the same time. In the evenings, after formal lessons, the palace becomes quieter. A servant lights lamps. The flame trembles in a dish of oil. Gold leaf glints briefly on a painted wall. Somewhere, musicians practice softly. In a corner, a girl repeats foreign words under her breath, not because anyone is forcing her now, but because she likes the shape of them. Language gives the world more doors. It lets her speak to sailors, priests, diplomats, soldiers, scholars, and eventually men who believe they are too powerful to be persuaded. This is not the Cleopatra of legend yet. This is a girl building a mind in rooms of stone and shade. A girl learning that beauty fades from conversation quickly if there is no intelligence behind it. A girl watching adults flatter Rome and fear Rome. A girl who may already sense that Egypt is old and glorious, but not safe. And beyond the calm of the lesson room, the wider world is shifting. Egypt is rich, but Rome is growing. The Nile still floods and recedes. Fields still turn green along the river. Grain still fills ships. Temples still receive offerings. Priests still keep rituals. Farmers still watch the sky and soil. Merchants still bargain. Children are still born. Meals are still cooked. Songs are still sung. And ordinary life continues, as it almost always does, even while large forces gather beyond sight. But in the palace, those forces are felt. Cleopatra's father has enemies. The royal family's power is uncertain. Roman politicians treat Egypt not simply as an ally, but as a prize, a source of wealth, a question to be settled. A country may be ancient and still feel fragile. A crown may be golden and still depend on other people's armies. The young Cleopatra sees enough to understand that a ruler must do more than sit on a throne. A ruler must appear divine to some, reasonable to others, generous to allies, intimidating to enemies, familiar to subjects, impressive to foreigners, and unshaken in public, even when private fear moves like a draft under the door. This is a great deal for any human being. It is especially great for a young woman in a court where many people would prefer power to pass through men they could control. The palace trains her in another subject too, the art of being watched. A princess does not move through court as a private person. Her gestures are interpreted. Her friendships are noticed. Her clothing is a message. Her silence may be called wisdom by one faction and arrogance by another. If she laughs with a visiting scholar, someone wonders why. If she favors an Egyptian priest, someone remembers. If she speaks too confidently before older men, they may call it brilliance, while secretly naming it danger. So she learns composure. This is a soft but demanding discipline. To keep the face calm while information changes. To listen to a man who underestimates her and let him finish, because his arrogance may reveal more than his answer. To remember which advisor speaks for himself and which advisor carries another person's fear. To notice when a servant hesitates before delivering a message. To hear the difference between praise and warning. In the palace dining rooms, politics sits at every table. Gold cups, fruit, fish, bread, wine, honey, figs, olives, music in the background, and beneath it all the quiet movement of ambition. A royal meal is never only a meal. It is a place where alliances are softened, insults are disguised, loyalties are tested, and young people learn what not to say. Cleopatra's family history would have taught her caution. The Ptolemies had ruled magnificently and violently. Brothers, sisters, mothers, sons, husbands, wives, advisors, soldiers, and foreign powers all moved through the story. Some rulers were clever, some weak, some cruel, some unlucky. The dynasty had wealth and ceremony, but it also had a habit of turning inward upon itself. Cleopatra was born into splendor, but splendor in her world always had a blade hidden somewhere beneath the silk. At night, when the palace finally quiets, one can imagine her standing near a balcony, looking over Alexandria. The city below is calmer than the court, though only from a distance. Lamps in houses, torches near the harbor, the lighthouse fire turning slowly. A ship arriving late, voices fading down a street. The sea beyond it all, dark and patient. A young princess may have looked at that city and understood that ruling meant belonging to people who would never know the rooms she slept in, yet whose grain, taxes, prayers, and loyalty formed the real weight of the crown. When Cleopatra was 18, her father died. The palace would have entered one of those strange royal silences where grief and calculation stand close together. Curtains drawn, messengers sent, priests summoned, advisors whispering in corners, servants watching faces carefully, family members measuring not only sorrow, but opportunity. Now, Cleopatra was queen, but not alone, according to the dynastic arrangement. She was to rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy III. He was still a child. On paper, they shared power. In practice, Cleopatra was the one with maturity, intelligence, and political will. She placed herself forward. She acted as ruler. She issued orders, received envoys, and worked to hold Egypt's government in her own hands. This would not be accepted quietly. Her brother's advisors had their own ambitions. A child king can be easier to control than a strong queen. The advisors around him did not want Cleopatra to dominate. They wanted authority through him. In a palace, opposition does not always arrive with shouting. It arrives as advice, suspicion, delayed documents, whispered criticism, careful rumors, alliances made over dinner, soldiers moved by someone else's order. Slowly, the struggle sharpened. Cleopatra's name may have been removed from official documents. Her position weakened. Her enemies presented themselves as defenders of tradition, guardians of the young king, protectors of Egypt against a woman they called too ambitious. It is a familiar pattern in history. Power resists those who hold it differently. Eventually, Cleopatra was forced to leave Egypt. Imagine that moment, not as melodrama, but as a cold, practical crisis. The queen cannot remain in the palace. The city is unsafe. Doors that once opened now close. Servants who once bowed may hesitate. Friends become quiet. Letters must be sent secretly. Gold must be moved. Loyal followers must be gathered. Horses, ships, routes, disguises, promises, all become part of survival. She went east, toward Syria, away from the city of her birth. She was still young, only in her early 20s, and she had lost her throne. For some, this might have been the end. For Cleopatra, it became another beginning. Before we move with her into exile, imagine the palace she leaves behind. The rooms do not change simply because she is gone. The fountains still run. Guards still stand at doors. The harbor still shines under morning light. Courtiers still gather in the same shaded places. And scribes still write the names of those now officially favored. This is one of the cruel things about losing power. The world continues in rooms that once belonged to you. Your absence becomes part of someone else's routine. For Cleopatra, exile would have meant not only danger, but a strange silence. No formal audiences, no familiar royal chamber, no easy access to the officials who once bowed, no certainty that messages will arrive, no certainty that those who promise loyalty will remain loyal if the winds change. A queen without a throne must turn identity into action, because title alone cannot protect her. She travels east. The roads away from Alexandria do not carry the same sea-bright glamour as the city. Dust rises under feet and hooves. Camps form and dissolve. Fires are lit at night. Messengers come and go. The language of the court is replaced by the practical language of movement. Supplies, horses, soldiers, gold, timing, trust. Perhaps there are nights when she cannot sleep. not because the bed is hard, though it may be, not because the camp is noisy, though it is, but because exile asks the mind the same questions again and again. Who is still loyal? Which route is safe? How much money remains? Can Caesar be reached if Caesar comes? Will Egypt remember her? Will Alexandria open its gates or close them forever? These thoughts can be allowed to move gently tonight, like shadows beyond a tent wall. A small oil lamp burns, a map lies open, a servant waits outside. Someone brings news from the west. Someone else claims that more soldiers can be gathered. If promises are made, Cleopatra listens. She weighs the words. She has lost the palace, but not the habit of command. Exile is a hard teacher. It removes comfort, but it can sharpen purpose. In Syria, Cleopatra did not simply mourn. She sought support. She gathered soldiers. She made contacts. She planned. The queen who had been pushed out prepared to return. Let the story slow here. The scene changes from polished palace floors to travel roads, military camps, foreign courts, letters sealed at night, and the uneasy patience of a ruler without a throne. The air is dustier. The beds are less fine. The people around her are useful, but not all trustworthy. Every conversation has a price. Every promise may need another promise to hold it. And while Cleopatra prepares in exile, a Roman enters the story. Julius Caesar was already one of the most powerful men of his age. He had fought in Gaul, challenged rivals, crossed political boundaries that could not easily be uncrossed, and become a figure at the center of Rome's storms. His conflict with Pompey had shaken the Roman world, and Pompey, defeated, fled toward Egypt, hoping perhaps for protection. Egypt's young king and his advisors faced a terrible calculation. Pompey had once been great. Caesar was now victorious. To please Caesar, they chose to remove Pompey. They thought this would win favor. They misjudged the Roman sense of honor, politics, and appearance. When Caesar arrived in Egypt and learned what had happened, he was displeased. A defeated enemy might be an enemy, but treachery toward him was not the gift Caesar wanted. Now Caesar was in Alexandria. He stayed in the royal palace. He wished to settle Egyptian affairs, recover debts, and perhaps secure stability in a country Rome could not ignore. Cleopatra heard of his presence and understood immediately that history had opened a narrow door. She had to meet him, but Alexandria was controlled by her brother's faction. To enter openly would be dangerous. So the story gives us one of the most famous images of her life. Cleopatra smuggled into Caesar's presence, hidden inside a rolled carpet or bedding bundle, carried by a loyal servant. The exact details have been retold in different ways, but the meaning remains powerful. A queen who cannot walk through the palace gate finds another way into the room. Imagine the night, the harbor dark, guards at doors, lamps burning in corridors, a servant carrying a bundle, perhaps heavy, perhaps awkward, but not suspicious enough to stop. The palace is full of people loyal to different masters. Every footstep matters. Every pause could become danger. The bundle is brought before Caesar. It is opened. Cleopatra emerges. Let this scene unfold slowly, because it is not merely a trick. It is a performance of survival. The room is lit by lamps. Roman officers may be nearby, men far from home, alert in a foreign palace. Caesar, who has crossed battlefields and senates, who has seen kings flatter him and enemies resist him, now sees a young queen appear where she should not have been able to enter. She has turned the guarded palace into a stage, and herself into the message. Her clothes may be travel-worn or carefully chosen. Her face may be tired, but it cannot show fear. She has only a short time to become more convincing than the people who have been speaking against her for months. This is one reason the story lasts. It captures, in one image, the essence of political intelligence. Understand the locked door, then find the opening no one expects. Caesar is surprised, but surprise is only the beginning. A foolish person can surprise. A desperate person can surprise. Cleopatra must do more. She must persuade. She must present Egypt's problem as Caesar's opportunity. She must show that restoring her is not sentimental, but useful. She must make herself memorable and reasonable at the same time. Think of the languages moving in that room: Greek, perhaps, the shared language of Eastern courts and educated conversation; Latin, if she chooses to display it; Egyptian in her mind, tied to the people beyond the palace. The silent language of gesture, risk, confidence, and timing. Cleopatra does not come as a helpless girl. She comes as a ruler temporarily dispossessed, asking another ruler to recognize advantage. In the streets outside, the city does not know the exact shape of the meeting. Alexandria sleeps uneasily. Factions wait. Guards change shifts. Ships move in the harbor. Lamps burn near the palace walls. Somewhere, Cleopatra's enemies may believe they have contained her. They do not yet know that she has already entered the center of the game, not as a helpless exile, but as a strategist who has turned vulnerability into theater. The moment is practical, but it is also unforgettable. Caesar sees a young queen willing to risk everything to speak for herself. She does not wait to be described by her enemies. She arrives in person. She speaks, perhaps in Greek, perhaps in Latin, perhaps in whatever language best suits the moment. She explains her claim. She explains the weakness of her brother's advisors. She presents herself not only as wronged, but as capable. Caesar is older, experienced, politically brilliant, and used to power. Cleopatra is young, intelligent, bold, and fluent in the language of opportunity. They form an alliance. Whether we call it love first, politics first, or both at once, it changed Egypt's future. It is often tempting to simplify powerful relationships into romance alone, or calculation alone. Human life is rarely so tidy. Cleopatra needed Caesar's support. Caesar needed Egypt stable, and perhaps admired Cleopatra's mind, presence, and courage. Attraction and policy could exist in the same room. Outside that room, however, the situation worsened. Ptolemy XIII's faction resisted. Alexandria became a place of conflict. Caesar and Cleopatra were surrounded by danger. The palace that had seemed secure became a fortified space. The harbor, ships, narrow streets, palace corridors, and royal quarter all became part of a struggle. This part of the story can grow loud, but we will keep it soft. We do not need to linger on violence. It is enough to know that there was fighting, fire, fear, and uncertainty. At some point, flames spread near the harbor, and later stories connected this time with damage to books and stored texts in Alexandria. Whether the great library's fate belongs fully to this moment or to a more complex history, the image is still poignant. Knowledge near fire, scrolls near war. A city of learning caught in the politics of empire. Inside the palace during such a crisis, time would not move normally. Hours stretch. News arrives in fragments. Someone hears shouting from the harbor. Someone else reports movement in the streets. A messenger is late, and everyone imagines why. Food is carried into rooms where no one has much appetite. Lamps burn too long. Soldiers sleep in armor, or do not sleep at all. The palace, once built for ceremony, becomes a place of waiting. Cleopatra must wait too, but not passively. She listens to Caesar's plans. She considers which Egyptian factions may still be reached. She thinks of her brother, of advisors who underestimated her, of priests and officials whose loyalty may depend on the next messenger. She has returned to the palace, but not to safety. Regaining a room is not the same as regaining a kingdom. At night, the city outside may glow with scattered fires. The sea wind carries smoke. The lighthouse still burns, indifferent and necessary. The harbor water reflects flames and stars together. Alexandria, the city of books and trade, becomes for a time a city holding its breath. In a sleep story, we can let the danger pass at a distance. We do not need the noise. We can stay with the quieter feeling beneath it. The awareness that fragile things are always near powerful ones. A scroll near a torch, a young queen near an empire, a city of learning near a civil war. A future balanced on decisions made in rooms where everyone is tired. For months, the outcome remained uncertain. Then reinforcements came. Caesar's position strengthened. The opposing army was defeated. Ptolemy XIII died while fleeing. And Cleopatra was restored as queen, now ruling with another younger brother according to dynastic form, though her own power was real. A lost throne had been regained. Let the story rest here for a moment by the Nile. After danger, the river offers a slower rhythm. Cleopatra and Caesar traveled in Egypt, according to tradition, along the Nile. Imagine a royal barge moving beneath a wide sky, reeds along the banks, villages near the water, birds rising from marshes, priests at temples, farmers working along fields made green by the river's gift. The pyramids already ancient, older to Cleopatra than Cleopatra is to us in many ways of imagination. On the Nile, the scale of Egypt becomes visible. Alexandria is Greek, Mediterranean, cosmopolitan, but the Nile is older, deeper, the heart of the land. Cleopatra's choice to present herself as an Egyptian ruler, to speak the language, to take part in religious life, to associate herself with ancient traditions, was not merely costume. It was politics, identity, and belonging. She ruled through Alexandria, but she needed Egypt beyond Alexandria. A child was born to her after this time. She named him Caesarion, Little Caesar. She said Julius Caesar was his father to Cleopatra. The child represented more than motherhood. He was a possible bridge between Egypt and Rome, between her dynasty and the most powerful man in the Mediterranean. A baby in a palace can be loved by his mother and also carry political meaning before he can speak. Months after restoration would not have been simple celebration. A throne regained must be secured. Officials who served the old faction must be watched, forgiven, replaced, or used. Temples must be honored. Money must be counted. Grain must move. Soldiers must be paid. The people must see continuity, not only palace drama. Cleopatra's public image becomes part of governance. She appears not merely as a returning woman, but as queen, pharaoh, protector, priestly presence, and embodiment of Egypt's order. Coins may carry her face. Documents may carry her name. Priests may speak her titles in temple rituals. In Egyptian tradition, the ruler has sacred responsibilities, even when the dynasty is Greek. Cleopatra understood the value of appearing in forms her subjects recognized. She could stand in Greek courts and Egyptian temples, shift language, costume, title, and emphasis, not because she was insincere, but because Egypt itself was layered. The Nile journey with Caesar, whether brief in reality or enlarged in memory, offers a softer image of that layered kingship. Imagine the river at dusk. The barge moves slowly. Oars touch water with an even rhythm. Reeds whisper along the banks. Villages glow with cook fires. Cattle stand near the water. Children watch the royal vessel pass. Priests wait near temple steps. The sky changes from gold to violet. The river, which has carried Egyptian life for thousands of years, does not hurry for Caesar or Cleopatra. It moves as it always has, patient and essential. Caesar. The Roman sees the antiquity of Egypt. Cleopatra, the queen, sees what she must protect and use. Along the Nile, politics becomes geography. Whoever rules Egypt must understand that power does not end at Alexandria. It flows through irrigation channels, temple estates, grain shipments, village obligations, scribal records, and the annual hope that the river will rise enough, but not too much. Here, the story becomes almost quiet enough for sleep. A barge beneath stars, lamps swinging gently, water against wood. Two rulers speaking perhaps of old kings, of Rome, of Alexander, of debts, of children, of what can be promised and what cannot. Around them, servants step softly, guards watch the banks. The river carries all of them south and north through a country older than their ambitions. Imagine the nursery at night, a lamp low, linen, the soft breathing of an infant outside. Advisors worry, soldiers stand guard, Rome debates, the kingdom waits. Inside, for a moment, there is only a mother watching a child sleep. History often forgets how many empires pass through rooms where someone is simply trying not to wake the baby. Cleopatra later went to Rome. To travel from Egypt to Rome was not only a journey across water, it was a move into the heart of another world's judgment. Rome admired Egypt's wealth and antiquity, but many Romans distrusted monarchy, foreign luxury, and powerful queens. Cleopatra stayed in Caesar's villa, and her presence must have drawn attention. She was a queen in a city that officially disliked kings. She was foreign, wealthy, intelligent, and connected to Caesar. That was enough to make many people uneasy. Rome itself was different from Alexandria. Alexandria opened toward the sea with Greek learning, Egyptian wealth, and royal ceremony. Rome was crowded, political, noisy, ambitious, full of senators, clients, soldiers, temples, markets, and old Republican pride. Cleopatra would have watched it carefully. She had spent her life reading rooms. Rome was a very large room. Let us walk through it with her at a distance. The streets are busy, not elegant in the Alexandrian way, but forceful. Clients hurry to patrons. Senators move with entourages. Vendors shout. Builders hammer. Priests pass toward temples. Political graffiti appears. Crowds gather wherever rumor has ripened. Rome smells of smoke, bread, sweat, animals, stone dust, perfume, drains, oil, and ambition. Cleopatra does not belong there, and that is part of her power and part of her danger. She is a queen in a republic that fears kings. She is a mother with a child linked to Caesar. She is a foreign ruler in a city that both desires and mistrusts foreign wealth. Her presence asks questions Rome does not want to answer. What is Caesar becoming? What place does Egypt have in Roman politics? Can a woman outside Rome influence the future inside it? In Caesar's villa, she may have lived surrounded by luxury and watchfulness. Visitors come and go. Some admire, some disapprove, some pretend indifference, and then repeat everything. Caesar is busy with reforms, honors, plans, enemies, and the strange loneliness of supreme power. Cleopatra waits, observes, receives, perhaps studies Rome's factions the way she once studied languages. At night, she may think of Alexandria. The sea light there is different. The palace air is different. In Rome, even the silence feels political. The city does not sleep easily because ambition does not sleep easily. Every household of importance seems to contain men calculating tomorrow's advantage. Cleopatra understands this kind of world. But understanding does not make it safe. Caesar's power grew controversial. Many Romans feared he wished to become king. Others depended on him. Others hated him. In 44 BC, he was killed by a group of senators. We do not need to dwell on the act. It is enough to hear the suddenness of it, the shock through the city, the way one death can alter the path of kingdoms. Cleopatra was in Rome when it happened. Suddenly, the protection that had supported her position was gone. The city became unsafe, uncertain, filled with factions and fear. She returned to Egypt with her son. The sea journey back must have felt different from the journey out. The first time, perhaps there had been ambition, display, calculation, maybe hope. Now there was urgency. The wind pushed the ship east. Rome receded behind her, but its shadow did not. Caesar was gone, but Rome remained, and Rome would continue to decide the fate of countries far beyond Italy. Back in Egypt, Cleopatra ruled. This period of her life is sometimes passed over quickly between famous Roman men. But it matters. She was not merely waiting for the next alliance. She governed a wealthy, complicated kingdom. She managed finances, grain production, religious presentation, diplomacy, internal stability, and the future of her children. A queen's work is not only the dramatic moment recorded by historians. It is the long work between crises. Let us enter one of those quieter days of rule. Morning in the palace begins with reports. Grain levels, tax receipts, temple requests, a shipment delayed, a local official accused of corruption, a messenger from Cyprus, a letter from a Roman contact, a priesthood asking for confirmation of privileges, a harbor matter, a legal dispute, a rumor from the east, a problem in the south. Every kingdom is made of such details. They are not glamorous, but they are the texture of power. Cleopatra hears them in sequence. A scribe reads, another waits with tablets, officials stand in careful order. The queen listens, asks, decides, postpones, commands. Her education matters here. Languages matter, numbers matter, memory matters. The ability to follow a chain of consequence from a village complaint to a royal treasury matters more than any jewel. Perhaps she walks later through a temple court. The stone is warm. Incense rises. Priests in linen speak formal words. The images on the walls show old gods. Offerings, crowns, eternal gestures carved long before her birth. Cleopatra's presence here is political and sacred. She must be seen as legitimate within Egyptian tradition, not only as the Greek-speaking heir of Ptolemies. The people may not see the private queen, but they see the ritual queen, and ritual shapes belief. At another hour, she may receive scholars. Alexandria's intellectual life did not vanish because Rome was dangerous. Mathematicians, physicians, philosophers, poets, geographers, and grammarians still lived in the city's orbit. A court that values learning gains prestige. A queen who can speak with learned men without depending entirely on flattery gains another kind of authority. In the afternoon heat, the palace slows. Even power must wait for the body. Curtains stir. Servants bring water. The sea shines beyond the walls. In a shaded room, children may play under watchful eyes. Caesarion grows. The court wonders what he will become. Every royal child is a hope and a problem wrapped in linen. The Nile rose and fell. Granaries filled or did not. Taxes were collected. Priests performed rituals. Scribes wrote accounts. Ships carried grain toward hungry markets. Temples received royal attention. Coins were struck. Messengers arrived. Cleopatra had to keep Egypt functioning while Rome fought itself. After Caesar's death, Roman power reorganized through conflict. The men who would matter most were Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Mark Antony, Caesar's friend, and a powerful general. Along with Lepidus for a time, they formed an alliance to defeat Caesar's assassins and divide authority. Eventually, the Roman world split in practice between Octavian in the west and Antony in the east. Antony needed money, supplies, and allies. Egypt had wealth, so he summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus. This meeting became another famous scene, almost theatrical in its later retellings. Cleopatra did not arrive as a defendant. She arrived as a queen. Her ship was described as magnificent, with purple sails and silver oars. Scented air, music, attendants, and a presentation associated with divinity and luxury. Whether every detail is exact or embroidered by later writers, the political artistry is clear. She understood entrance. Power is not only what one has, it is also what others believe they are seeing. Cleopatra knew how to turn arrival into message. She came not begging, but dazzling, not as a minor ally to be commanded, but as Egypt embodied, rich, ancient, sensual, sacred, intelligent, and necessary. Before that entrance, there would have been preparation. No royal display happens by accident. Fabrics are chosen, perfumes blended, musicians instructed, servants drilled, gifts selected, the order of appearance arranged, the speed of the ship considered, the posture of attendants planned. A queen who has been underestimated knows that the first sight of her must correct the error. Somewhere in the hours before Tarsus, Cleopatra may have sat very still while others worked around her. A robe adjusted, jewelry placed, hair arranged, a message reviewed. A servant asks a question in a low voice. Outside, sailors prepare the vessel. Oars are checked. Purple cloth moves in the air. The scent of incense or perfume waits in sealed containers. Every small element is part of a single sentence. Egypt is not weak if Egypt can arrive like this. This is one of the deep lessons of her life. Cleopatra lived in a world where men commanded armies, but she commanded perception with unusual skill. She could not always choose the battlefield. She could choose the scene. She could make herself difficult to dismiss. She could make alliance feel like destiny and negotiation feel like ceremony. Imagine the river Tarsus, the water reflecting color, people gathering along the banks, music carrying over the air, Antony waiting, perhaps amused, perhaps curious, perhaps already aware that this queen would not be handled like an ordinary client ruler. The ship approaches slowly enough for every eye to see. The oars move. The sails glow, perfume drifts. A queen steps into a story designed by herself. Antony was a very different man from Caesar, where Caesar was controlled, sharp, and political in a particular Roman way. Antony was known for soldierly charm, generosity, appetite, and dramatic energy. He was brave, popular with troops, capable of great loyalty and great excess. Cleopatra and Antony became close, and their relationship changed the balance of the Mediterranean. Again, we should not force the story into one simple shape. There was affection, there was desire, there was political need. Antony needed Egypt's resources. Cleopatra needed Roman protection and influence. They may have genuinely loved one another, and they certainly used one another's power. Love and strategy do not always travel separately. Sometimes they share the same boat. Antony came to Alexandria. There, for a time, the city became the stage of their shared world. Alexandria, under Cleopatra, could present something Rome did not have: ancient kingship, Greek learning, Egyptian ceremony, Mediterranean luxury, and a court where Antony could be more than one Roman among rivals. He could be a partner in a grand Eastern vision. The evenings in Alexandria must have been vivid. Lamplight on water, banquet rooms open to sea air, music, Philosophers and poets, courtiers watching carefully, servants carrying trays, politicians measuring every gesture, Antony laughing too loudly perhaps, Cleopatra listening more carefully than anyone guessed. Outside, the city continues. Merchants, sailors, priests, children, scribes, dock workers, weavers, cooks, all the ordinary people who make royal dreams possible. The court around Antony and Cleopatra became famous for pleasure. But pleasure in such a setting was never only pleasure. Banquets could impress allies, games could bind followers, gifts could announce abundance, jokes could test loyalty, shared luxury could create the feeling of a new political world, a world in which Rome's east might be more than a territory to be managed from Italy. Antony may have enjoyed the warmth of it, the admiration, the sense of living grandly. Cleopatra would have understood the uses of that enjoyment. Picture a banquet hall after midnight. The loudest laughter has softened. Musicians play something slower. Wine cups sit half full. Lamps burn low. The sea wind cools the room. A philosopher says something clever to a general who does not understand it. A servant replaces a fading garland. Antony leans back, tired and satisfied. Cleopatra turns a ring on her finger, listening to a report delivered almost invisibly at her side. Even at a feast, government continues. Messages arrive. A ship has docked. A Roman letter has come. A temple envoy waits. Someone in Syria hesitates. Someone in Judea watches. Someone in Rome speaks against them. The world outside the banquet hall presses gently, then less gently, against the doors. And there are quieter domestic images too. Children in the royal household, nurses and attendants, lessons planned, names chosen with dynastic meaning. Small sandals in palace rooms, the sound of a child calling for a mother who is also a queen. Cleopatra's motherhood is often treated as a footnote to her alliances, but children change the way power feels. They turn the future from an idea into faces. Cleopatra had children with Antony, twins first, a boy and a girl, and later another son. Her family grew, and with it her hopes for dynastic survival. She was not only protecting herself now, she was imagining futures for children born into a world of Roman rivalry. Antony and Cleopatra's alliance became more public, more ambitious, and more threatening to Octavian. Octavian was in Rome, careful, patient, politically skilled. He understood propaganda. He knew how to turn Roman suspicion toward Cleopatra. He presented Antony as a man corrupted by the East, distracted by a foreign queen, abandoning Roman values for luxury, monarchy, and Egypt. Cleopatra became, in Roman messaging, not a complex ruler, but a danger, an enchantress, a foreign threat. Propaganda is a strange kind of afterlife that begins before death. A person still living can become a story told by enemies. Details are selected, motives are simplified. Rumors are polished until they look like facts. Complex alliances become moral warnings. A queen governing a country becomes a seductress, ruining a Roman man. Because that story is easier for Rome to digest than the truth that Rome wanted Egypt, and that Antony made political choices of his own. Cleopatra could answer with her own imagery: coins, ceremonies, titles, public appearances, religious associations, the presentation of her children, the grandeur of Alexandria. But Octavian controlled Roman ears more effectively than she could. In Rome, distance helped him. Few Romans had seen Cleopatra. Many were ready to fear what they had not seen. This is one reason her reputation became so powerful and so distorted. The winners of political wars often shape memory. Octavian had every reason to make Cleopatra seem dangerous, seductive, unnatural, and controlling. If Antony had failed because he loved a foreign queen too much, then Octavian's victory could be presented as Rome rescuing itself from corruption. A living woman became a symbol in someone else's story. But in our quiet retelling, we can slow down and see the person behind the symbol. Cleopatra was trying to preserve Egypt's independence in a world where Rome's appetite was enormous. She was making alliances with the only powers able to help her. She was also ambitious, proud, and willing to gamble. She was not simply victim or villain. She was a ruler making decisions under pressure. The pressure moved toward war. In 31 BC, the forces of Antony and Cleopatra faced Octavian's forces near Actium, a battle at sea off the western coast of Greece. Ancient naval warfare was loud, dangerous, confusing, full of oars, sails, shouted orders, smoke, fear, and sudden changes of fortune. But tonight, we will not stay in the noise. We will keep our distance as one watches dark ships from a far shore. The battle went badly for Antony. Cleopatra. At some point, Cleopatra's ships broke away, and Antony followed. Interpretations differ. Was it planned? Panic? Strategy? Misjudgment? Later, writers debated motives. What matters is the result. Their fleet collapsed. Many men surrendered. Octavian's path to victory opened. For the people on the ships, history would not have felt like a clean sentence. It would have been confusion, wind, orders shouted and lost, oars beating water, sails shifting, smoke, fear. The difficulty of seeing the whole battle while trapped inside one small part of it. Later, writers and politicians make patterns in the moment. The commander they cannot find, the water between survival and ruin. Cleopatra's departure from the battle became one of the great accusations against her. But from a distance, we can be careful. Ancient sources are not neutral. Events at sea are difficult to reconstruct. Political defeat invites moral storytelling. The winners had every reason to make the queen seem cowardly or treacherous, and every reason to make Antony seem enslaved by passion rather than responsible for his own command. So tonight, we do not need to decide the unknowable with sharp certainty. We can let the ships fade into dusk and hold only the consequence. After Actium, the world of Antony and Cleopatra began to close. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Egypt. Imagine the return not as triumph, but as a long voyage beneath a heavy sky. The sea that once carried display now carries defeat. The same Alexandria waits, but changed. News travels faster than ships in the imagination. The court knows. The city knows enough. Allies hesitate. Enemies grow brave. Letters are sent, but replies are colder. Fortune has turned its face. Still, Cleopatra continues. She prepares defenses. She seeks support. She thinks of her children. She thinks of Egypt. She thinks of Octavian. A queen, near the end of power, must measure not only what can be saved, but how the ending itself will be remembered. These final months are full of rooms where people speak quietly. Messengers arrive with fewer promises. Allies delay. Some men who once praised Antony now calculate the benefit of changing sides. Treasuries are reviewed. Ships are counted. Fortifications considered. Letters are drafted to rulers who may not answer. Servants move through the palace with the careful silence of people who know the household mood has changed. Cleopatra may still appear splendid when necessary. Power must dress itself even when it is afraid. She may receive envoys in formal rooms, wearing jewels, speaking with controlled calm, offering terms, asking questions, studying faces. A queen cannot show collapse before collapse arrives. To the very end, appearance remains part of defense. At other times, she may withdraw, not to surrender, but to think. There are maps to study, children to protect if possible, treasures to secure, loyal attendants to trust, and the terrible question of what Octavian intends. She knows Rome. She knows triumphal processions. She understands the difference between being defeated and being displayed. Outside, Alexandria waits. The city has seen power change before. Markets still open. Fishermen still mend nets. Bakers still rise before dawn. Ordinary people continue because ordinary life must continue, even when rulers near the edge of ruin. Yet as rumors move through the streets, people look toward the palace. Ships in the harbor are counted by those who have no say in what ships will do. At night, the lighthouse keeps burning. Its flame does not take sides. It guides vessels through darkness, whether they bring allies, enemies, merchants, or news no one wants. In these last months, that steady light becomes one of the softer images to hold. A city uncertain, a queen cornered, and a beacon still doing its work. Octavian came to Egypt in 30 BC. Antony's position collapsed. In the confusion and sorrow of the final days, Antony heard a false report that Cleopatra was dead. He chose to die by his own hand. We can say this gently and not linger. He was brought to Cleopatra before the end, and in the story preserved by ancient writers, he died with her near him. Now, Cleopatra faced Octavian alone. The palace that had seen her childhood, her restoration, her triumphs, her children, her entertainments, her strategies, now became a place of waiting. Octavian wanted to take her alive to Rome. A captured queen in a Roman triumph would be displayed as a sign of conquest. For Cleopatra, this was unbearable. She had spent her life crafting how she appeared before the world. To be led as a prisoner through Roman streets would reduce her from ruler to trophy. She met Octavian. He was polite, controlled, and younger than both Caesar and Antony had been. He was not easily charmed. He came not as a lover, not as a partner, but as the victor. Cleopatra, skilled as she was, likely understood that her room for maneuver had become very small. She arranged her end. The traditional story says she died by the bite of an asp, a sacred snake, though other possibilities have been suggested. No one knows with certainty. What remains clear is that she chose death rather than public humiliation in Rome. She was 39 years old. Let the scene be quiet, not sensational, not full of shouted drama. A room in Alexandria, attendants loyal to the end. The heat of Egypt outside, the sea not far away. A queen who had spoken many languages, read many books, traveled to Rome, met Caesar, loved or allied with Antony, ruled Egypt, born children, negotiated with empire, and watched the world narrow to one final decision. Perhaps there were ordinary objects nearby. A couch, a low table, a cup, a folded cloth, a basket, a lamp, a seal, a piece of jewelry removed from the body and set down for the last time. History often frames death with grand meaning, but the room itself may have contained small, quiet things. The human end of a legendary life happens among objects that do not know they are witnessing legend. Her attendants matter here. Ancient accounts remember loyal women near her at the end, especially Eros and Charmian. Whether every detail is precise or shaped by later drama, the image of attendants remaining with their queen is deeply moving. Power often isolates, but loyalty at the end is one of the last forms of dignity. They do not change the outcome. They change the loneliness of it. Octavian wanted spectacle. Cleopatra denied him that part. Whatever else may be said of her final choice, it was consistent with a life spent controlling presentation. She had entered Caesar's room on her own terms. She had sailed to Antony as a goddess-like queen. She had faced Rome's suspicion with royal display. At the end, she refused to become someone else's exhibit. Let the final lamp burn low. Outside, Alexandria continues breathing. The harbor water touches stone. A gull cries. Somewhere, a scribe will soon write what has happened, and that writing will begin the long transformation from life into history. From history into legend. From legend into 1,000 retellings in languages Cleopatra herself might have liked to learn. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic kingdom ended. Egypt became a province under Roman control. Octavian would soon become Augustus, the first Roman emperor, though Rome would still tell itself many stories about what it had become. Egypt, ancient and rich, would feed Rome with grain and remain vital to imperial power, but it would no longer have its own pharaoh and the old line of kings and queens. After the ending, administration begins. This is one of history's colder rhythms. A kingdom falls, and clerks still need records. Storehouses must be counted. Land must be assessed. Grain must be shipped. Officials must be appointed. Soldiers must be stationed. Temples must learn the new arrangement. The Nile continues to rise and fall, indifferent to the name of the power collecting revenue from its fields. For ordinary Egyptians, change may have arrived unevenly. Some felt it quickly. New officials, new taxes, new loyalties demanded. Others experienced it as another distant shift above them while they still planted, harvested, paid, prayed, married, buried, and watched the river. Empires are enormous in history books, but they enter daily life through receipts. Soldiers, legal documents, prices, and the faces of men who come to collect. Alexandria changed too. The city remained important, rich, brilliant, and restless, but it was no longer the capital of an independent kingdom. The palace world that shaped Cleopatra's life became part of Roman imperial geography. The royal dream was gone, but the harbor remained. The lighthouse remained. Scholars, merchants, sailors, priests, and families continued under new arrangements. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt. That phrase is often repeated, but let it settle for a moment. The last. Behind her stood thousands of years of Egyptian kingship. Pyramids already ancient, temples along the Nile, rituals older than Rome, the long memory of a river civilization. Cleopatra herself was Greek by dynasty, Egyptian by kingship, Alexandrian by city, Mediterranean by politics, and global by memory. She stood at a crossing point where old and new worlds met. Why do people remember her? Not only because of beauty. Beauty alone does not hold history for 2,000 years. They remember her because she seemed to contain contradictions that never stopped glowing. Scholar and seducer and rumor, queen and exile, mother and strategist, Egyptian pharaoh and Greek monarch, ally of Rome and threat to Rome. A woman navigating male power without surrendering herself to invisibility. They remember her also because every age remakes her. Roman writers made her dangerous. Later poets made her passionate. Painters made her luminous. Playwrights made her tragic. Films made her glamorous. Historians try to recover the ruler beneath the perfume of legend. Each version says something about Cleopatra, but also something about the people telling the story. This is one reason we must be gentle with the past. Person becomes simpler after death if we are not careful. We turn them into one word: beautiful, ambitious, tragic, manipulative, brilliant, doomed. Cleopatra resists one word. She asks for several: educated, political, strategic, proud, vulnerable, theatrical, practical, maternal, dangerous to her enemies, dependent on allies, powerful, and not powerful enough to stop Rome. They remember her because her life touched the lives of famous men. Yes, but also because she refused to be only a figure beside them. Caesar was Caesar before he met Cleopatra. Antony was Antony before he loved her. Octavian became Augustus after defeating her. But Cleopatra remains in the story not merely as a companion to their greatness. She remains because she was a force of her own, a mind trained for rule, a voice capable of crossing languages, a queen whose choices mattered to the fate of Egypt and Rome. She made mistakes. All rulers do. Some of her gambles failed. Some alliances brought danger. Some decisions may have harmed the people she hoped to protect. To make her only heroic would be too simple. To make her only manipulative would be too shallow. She was human in a position where humanity had little room to breathe. This is perhaps the gentler lesson of her story. Power is not a clear room. It is crowded. It contains fear, ambition, loyalty, love, performance, intelligence, vanity, hope, and necessity. Cleopatra moved through that room with more skill than most, but even great skill cannot always defeat the direction of an age. Rome was rising. Egypt was vulnerable. Cleopatra tried to hold the door for a while. She did now, as we move toward the end of this night journey. Let us return not to the final room, but to Alexandria itself, because a life is more than its ending. Imagine the city after sunset. The harbor darkens. The lighthouse flame glows across the water. Ships rock gently at anchor. In the royal quarter, lamps shine behind screens. The palace gardens release the scent of flowers after heat. Somewhere, scholars continue their arguments. Somewhere, a woman speaks Egyptian to a priest, Greek to a philosopher, Latin to a Roman envoy, and the private language of a mother to her child. The world is uncertain, but the evening is beautiful. There are scrolls on a table. There is a map weighted at the corners. There is a bowl of fruit. There are sandals set near a couch. There is a breeze from the sea. There is a queen standing near an open window, listening to the city she was born to rule, and the empire that waits beyond the horizon. Let this imagined evening widen a little. Below the palace, Alexandria moves into night by layers. Market stalls close. Fishermen secure nets. Oil lamps appear in windows. A priest returns from a temple court. A scholar walks home, still arguing with himself. A mother calls a child indoors. A sailor sings badly and softly near the quay. The lighthouse flame lifts above all of it, patient and high. A human answer to the darkness of the sea. In the palace, a scribe finishes a line. The reed pen scratches. Stops, scratches again. Ink darkens on papyrus. Records are rolled, sealed, stored somewhere. A young attendant folds a linen garment. Somewhere, a guard tries not to yawn. Somewhere, a child of the royal household turns in sleep, unaware that adults have made the world very complicated. Cleopatra's life was lived in such evenings as much as in famous moments. Not every day contained Caesar. Not every night contained Antony. Not every dawn carried war. Most days of rule were made of messages, audiences, ceremonies, accounts, lessons, meals, fatigue, small irritations, and the discipline of appearing composed. It is in these ordinary intervals that a person becomes real again. She does not know yet exactly how the story will end. No one does. While living, history only looks inevitable afterward. In the moment, there are choices, letters, delays, hopes, calculations, and mournings that arrive whether or not the night has brought peace. Cleopatra lived inside those mornings. She studied, planned, spoke, traveled, negotiated, celebrated, feared, and began again. Let the dates drift now. 69 BC can drift. 51 BC can drift. 48 BC. 44 BC. 30 BC. 30 BC. Let them move away like small boats on dark water. Let Caesar drift. Let Antony drift. Let Octavian drift. Let the palace corridors, the royal barges, the purple sails, the library shelves, the marble courts, the Nile reeds, and the Roman streets drift softly into the distance. What remains is quieter, a girl learning languages, a young queen refusing exile as an ending, a mother watching over children in a palace by the sea, a ruler listening for the sound of Rome beyond the horizon, a woman whose name survived because she understood that to speak in many tongues is to open many doors, and because she walked through the dangerous doors her age placed before her. You do not need to judge her tonight. You can simply let her story rest. The sea is calm now. The lighthouse burns steadily. The last scribes close their scrolls. The palace lamps are lowered. The streets of Alexandria grow quiet, though not silent. No great city is ever fully silent. There is always water, wind, footsteps, a whisper, a guard changing place, a distant song, a child turning in sleep. Cleopatra belongs now to that soft distance where history becomes almost dreamlike. She is no longer trapped in the urgency of her choices. She is no longer surrounded by advisors, soldiers, envoys, rivals, and Roman ambition. She is part of memory, complicated, luminous, and far away. And you are here, safely in your own room, with nothing to decide and no empire waiting at the door. Let the harbor darken. Let the library sleep. Let the Nile move under the stars. Let the palace breathe out the heat of the day. Let the Queen of Egypt step back into legend. Not sharply, not dramatically, but gently, like a figure passing behind a thin curtain of gold and blue. And let the story release its heavier parts. Let the throne room drift. Let the exile road drift. Let the Roman villa drift. Let the purple sails drift. Let the sea battle drift far away, until it is only a few dark shapes on the horizon. Let the final room drift too, not forgotten, but softened by distance, held in the quiet respect we give to lives that were complicated, brilliant, and finite. What remains is the sound of Alexandria at night, a rope tapping gently against a mast, a lamp flame moving in a bowl of oil, a scroll being placed carefully on a shelf, a fountain cooling stone, a mother whispering to a child, a guard shifting his weight beside a palace door, a scholar closing tired eyes over a problem he will try again to solve tomorrow. A queen's name, carried forward not by one perfect truth, but by many imperfect memories. Cleopatra. The name can be allowed to become soft now. Not a command, not a battle cry, not a rumor in Rome, only a name moving across time, passing from mouth to mouth, book to book, language to language, until it reaches this quiet room tonight. You do not need to hold it tightly. Let it rest beside the sea wind, the papyrus, the lighthouse, the worn stone, the dark water, and the old human wish to be remembered with some measure of fairness. The night is very old. The sea keeps its rhythm. The lamps go out one by one, and somewhere in the distance, history turns a page so softly that it sounds almost like sleep.